October 14th, 1957. The streets of Manhattan were just beginning to wake up. Office workers hurried past storefronts. Taxi horns echoed between tall buildings. Nothing seemed out of place. Then a black sedan slowed near the entrance of a luxury apartment building. A man stepped onto the sidewalk. He looked calm, confident, like someone who had done the same routine hundreds of times. He never saw the gunman until it was too late. A single shot shattered the morning silence. People screamed. Some ran. Others froze where they stood. The wounded man staggered backward, grabbing the side of his head as blood slipped through his fingers. The shooter disappeared into the crowd almost as quickly as he had appeared. Within minutes, police cars surrounded the block. Reporters rushed to the scene. Rumors spread across New York faster than the sirens. This wasn't just another shooting. Someone had tried to kill one of the most powerful men in America. Not a politician, not a movie star, a mafia king. But the biggest mystery wasn't who pulled the trigger. It was who gave the order. Because in the mafia, nothing happened without permission. Every bullet carried a message. Every betrayal came with a price. The man who survived that attack knew exactly what it meant. Someone had decided his time was over. The only question was, why would the mafia want one of its own most respected bosses dead? The answer begins decades earlier, long before that gunshot echoed through Manhattan. It begins with a young immigrant who learned that power didn't always come from violence. Sometimes, the most dangerous weapon was patience. Frank Costello didn't grow up dreaming of becoming a crime boss. Born in southern Italy, he arrived in New York as a child with his family, chasing the same promise that attracted millions of immigrants, a better life. Instead, he found crowded streets, poverty, and neighborhoods where survival depended on making the right friends before making the wrong enemies. The city was changing fast. So was organized crime. Street gangs controlled entire blocks. Young men earned respect with their fists long before they earned money. Frank stepped into that world while still a teenager. He wasn't the strongest. He wasn't the loudest. And he certainly wasn't the most feared. But he noticed something others ignored. The men giving orders rarely pulled the trigger themselves. That lesson stayed with him. While others built reputations through violence, Frank built relationships. He listened more than he talked. He remembered favors. He understood that information could be worth more than cash. Those quiet habits slowly opened doors that brute force never could. Before long, he crossed paths with ambitious young gangsters who would shape the future of the American Mafia. One of them was a rising criminal named Charles "Lucky" Luciano. Luciano wasn't interested in old traditions. He wanted efficiency, business, money. He recognized something unusual in Frank. Costello could negotiate where others threatened. He could calm a conflict before it became a war. That made him valuable. As the years passed, the two men became trusted partners. During the years of Prohibition, illegal alcohol poured into New York by the truckload. Fortunes were made overnight. Police officers could be bribed. Politicians could be influenced. Every successful shipment strengthened their growing empire. But while others celebrated quick profits, Frank focused on something bigger. Power that lasted. He quietly expanded gambling operations. He invested in political connections. Judges, city officials, and influential businessmen slowly became part of a network built on favors instead of fear. People began calling him the Prime Minister of the Underworld. It wasn't because he looked dangerous. It was because he could make problems disappear with a phone call. That reputation made him one of the most influential men in organized crime. But influence creates envy, and envy rarely stays silent. Across the mafia, another powerful figure watched Frank's growing success with increasing frustration. He believed leadership belonged to men willing to rule through fear, not diplomacy. He believed Frank had become too comfortable, too political, too independent. That man was Vito Genovese. For years, their rivalry stayed beneath the surface. They smiled in public. They shook hands at meetings. But behind closed doors, every conversation carried hidden meaning. Every alliance shifted the balance of power. Frank believed compromise kept the peace. Genovese believed peace was simply the time between wars. Neither man was willing to step aside. Neither intended to lose. And before long, one decision inside the mafia would force both men onto a collision course that neither could escape. What happened next would transform New York's underworld. and place a target squarely on Frank Costello's back. The balance of power inside the mafia is rarely broken by gunfire alone. More often, it begins with whispers. By the early 1950s, Frank Costello appeared untouchable. His gambling empire generated enormous profits. His political connections reached deep into New York's government. Police commanders knew his name. Judges had heard of him. Even people with no connection to organized crime understood that Frank Costello wasn't just another mob boss. He was a man who preferred influence over intimidation. But that image created a dangerous illusion. While Costello was building alliances in public, Vito Genovese was building loyalty in shadows. Genovese had returned to America determined to reclaim what he believed was rightfully his. During his years away, Costello had become the public face of the family. Every successful business deal, every powerful political contact, every profitable racket reminded Genovese that someone else was sitting in the chair he wanted. To him, this wasn't business. It was personal. Inside private meetings, Genovese carefully measured every conversation. Who supported Costello? Who could be persuaded? Who could be frightened? He understood one simple rule of organized crime. Power didn't belong to the smartest man. It belonged to the man who convinced everyone else he was inevitable. At first, Costello didn't treat the growing tension as an immediate threat. He believed years of shared history would prevent an all-out war. After all, open conflict attracted police attention. It disrupted business. It cost everyone money. From Costello's perspective, compromise was the logical choice. From Genovese's perspective, compromise looked like weakness. At the same time, another problem was closing in. The American government had begun paying closer attention to organized crime than ever before. High-profile investigations and public hearings forced mafia leaders into the spotlight. Reporters camped outside courthouses. Flashbulbs exploded as crime bosses walked past cameras that had once ignored them. Costello's calm appearance during questioning became legendary. He answered carefully. He revealed almost nothing. Yet every appearance made him even more recognizable. That publicity came with a price. A boss who becomes famous also becomes vulnerable. The pressure inside the organization continued to grow. Some captains remained loyal to Costello because he made them wealthy. Others quietly shifted toward Genovese, believing the future belonged to a leader willing to rule through fear. No one wanted to stand on the losing side. Every conversation became a test of loyalty. Every meeting carried hidden meaning. Then came the decision that changed everything. Genovese concluded that as long as Frank Costello was alive, he would never truly control the family. Negotiation was over. Only one solution remained. On the morning of October 14th, 1957, Costello left his Manhattan apartment, expecting an ordinary day. Instead, a gunman stepped from the shadows. A shot rang out. The bullet grazed Costello's head instead of killing him instantly. Dazed and bleeding, he stumbled back inside the building. The assassin fled before anyone could stop him. For most people, surviving an assassination would have inspired revenge. Costello thought differently. He understood the message. The attack wasn't simply an attempt on his life. It was a declaration that the balance of power had already shifted. He could fight back. He could trigger a bloody war that would consume the entire organization. Or he could walk away while he still had the chance. It was a decision few mafia bosses had ever faced, and even fewer survived long enough to make it. Frank Costello chose the unexpected path. Rather than launch a campaign of retaliation, he gradually stepped aside from day-to-day leadership. To outsiders, it looked like surrender. To those who understood the mafia, it looked like strategy. Sometimes surviving was the greatest victory of all, but retirement didn't erase old enemies. The Underworld never truly forgets. And while Costello had escaped death once, another powerful figure was about to discover that becoming the boss could be even more dangerous than trying to kill one. Frank Costello had survived the bullet, but surviving wasn't the same as winning. The small scar on the side of his head became a permanent reminder that, in the mafia, there was no such thing as a peaceful retirement. A boss could step away from power, but he could never completely escape the world that had made him. After the assassination attempt, Costello quietly handed control of the family to Vito Genovese. To many outsiders, it looked like the old king had surrendered. Inside organized crime, however, the decision was viewed very differently. Costello understood something that many ambitious gangsters never did. Power could always be replaced. Life could not. He had spent decades building an empire. He wasn't about to lose everything in a war fueled by pride. Instead of challenging Genovese, he withdrew from daily operations and lived a far quieter life than anyone expected. He still commanded respect. Older mafia figures continued to seek his advice. His opinions still carried weight, even without an official title. He had become something unusual in the American underworld. A former boss who was still alive. That alone was almost unheard of. Meanwhile, Vito Genovese finally occupied the seat he had wanted for years. He had waited, plotted, manipulated, and now, at last, he was the unquestioned leader. It should have been the beginning of his greatest triumph. Instead, it marked the beginning of his downfall. Genovese believed fear created loyalty, but fear also created enemies. Captains who had publicly supported him privately questioned his leadership. Some believed he had become too ruthless. Others worried that his hunger for control would eventually put them in danger as well. Unlike Costello, who preferred quiet negotiations, Genovese ruled through intimidation. The atmosphere inside the family changed almost overnight. Conversations became shorter. Meetings became colder. Trust became scarce. No one knew who might be listening. No one knew who might be next. At the same time, law enforcement was becoming more aggressive than ever before. For years, mafia leaders had hidden behind legitimate businesses, political influence, and silence. But those protections were beginning to crack. Federal investigators were gathering intelligence from multiple directions. Wiretaps improved. Informants became more valuable. And prosecutors were learning that the best way to weaken organized crime wasn't by chasing hundreds of soldiers. It was by targeting the men giving the orders. Then came another devastating blow. In 1957, one of the most infamous gatherings in mafia history took place in the quiet town of Appalachian, New York. Dozens of powerful mafia bosses from across the country met to discuss business, alliances, and the future of organized crime. They expected complete privacy. Instead, suspicious local police officers surrounded the meeting. Gangsters fled across fields, through woods, and over fences in expensive suits and polished shoes. Many were caught. Others escaped. But the damage had already been done. For the first time, the American public saw undeniable evidence that a nationwide mafia organization truly existed. The meeting became a public relations disaster. It also intensified federal investigations. Every major mafia leader suddenly found himself under greater scrutiny. Genovese was no exception. As pressure mounted, his enemies saw an opportunity. Some historians believe that several powerful figures in organized crime were no longer interested in protecting him. Whether motivated by revenge, self-preservation, or ambition, support around him slowly disappeared. The same tactics Genovese had once used against rivals were now being used against him. His circle grew smaller. His confidence turned into suspicion. Eventually, federal prosecutors built a narcotics case against him. In 1959, Vito Genovese was convicted on drug trafficking charges and sentenced to prison. He insisted he had been framed. Many believe the case involved testimony from individuals who had every reason to remove him from power. Whether every accusation was true or not, one fact remained undeniable. The man who had fought for years to become the most powerful boss in New York would spend the rest of his life behind bars. He died in prison in 1969. The throne he had sacrificed everything to obtain lasted only a fraction of the time he had imagined. Frank Costello watched all of this from the sidelines. He never publicly celebrated. He never sought revenge. He simply lived. For a man who had once been marked for death, that was its own victory. He spent his later years avoiding the spotlight that had nearly destroyed him. Friends described him as cautious but remarkably composed. He understood that every day outside a prison cell was a gift many of his former associates would never receive. When Frank Costello died of natural causes in 1973 at the age of 82, it marked one of the rarest endings in mafia history. He wasn't executed. He wasn't gunned down in a restaurant. He didn't die in a prison hospital. He died in his own bed. For someone who had spent most of his life surrounded by betrayal, violence, and conspiracy, that ending was almost unbelievable. His story also exposed a hidden rule that governed organized crime. The greatest threat to a mafia boss was rarely the police. It was another mafia boss. Bullets were only the final act. The real battles were fought long before the trigger was pulled. In whispered conversations, secret meetings, shifting loyalties, and silent betrayals. Frank Costello understood that truth better than almost anyone. He realized there comes a moment when survival requires something far more difficult than courage. It requires letting go of power. Vito Genovese believed absolute control would make him untouchable. Instead, it isolated him. Costello believed influence was more valuable than fear. In the end, one man ruled through intimidation and lost everything. The other chose survival over pride and lived to tell the tale. That is why the attempt on Frank Costello's life remains one of the most fascinating moments in mafia history. It wasn't simply a failed assassination. It was the moment an empire revealed its greatest weakness. Because every criminal organization claims to value loyalty. But behind closed doors, loyalty lasts only as long as it serves someone's ambition. And in the mafia, the most dangerous enemy is almost never standing across the street with a gun. He's usually sitting beside you at the same table, smiling, and waiting for the right moment to make your name the next one whispered in silence.